Ooh. So, US cruiser policy. Well, this is an interesting one to start off with. And honestly, I'm recording this on Friday the 30th of December. About to drive off to the first of Lord knows how many family Christmas parties I have coming up over the next few days. It's frankly disturbing. My family do not understand the concept of having a quiet Christmas or a quiet New Year. I'm already hoarse, and that's not just through talking to all of you, for as much as I have been lately. So, I hope you're going to enjoy this video. Hope you're going to find it interesting, because in many ways it is a summary combiner of all the videos done on US cruisers. And that means, he says, as he gets this correct, there you go, 30th number. That means it's going to refer a lot to them. So if you haven't watched the heavy cruiser, the cruiser videos on the US treaty cruisers, I wouldn't say you need to necessarily to watch this video, but I would say it's going to help. So there'll be a link to the playlist at the end, on the screen at the end, which comes up. I tend to program it so I finish talking. There's the list of various projects that have been done over the last Christmas period at the moment, and then that's up for a few seconds for people to be able to read it, and then it closes, and then there's a few seconds of the normal opening screen with the various options up. So it's probably about a 20-second wait before you get there, but then you'd have the full playlist. And US treaty cruisers in war and retrospect. Well, they had an interesting war, and they did really well when they were used in the way they were intended to be used. Unsurprisingly, for anything in the world, they didn't do so great when they were used in ways which they hadn't been designed for. Now, the thing is, you first have to think about why is the US Navy building cruisers in the first place. So I'm going to do a quick skip through this one, but I am going to point out I have a lovely book. I have noticed typos in it. I have no defense other than it was stared at by so many people and read through so many times that they got through. Apologies. And, yeah. This channel is entirely supported by all of you. So, without your support, it wouldn't be doing anything. Thank you. But let's go on to it. The thing is, the US Navy has an idea for what it wants to do with its cruisers post-World War I. And it's different. It's not what the Japanese Navy's looking at them, which they always sort of treated their cruisers, especially their larger cruisers, as, in terms of battleship fill-ins. It's been their policy since, well, the 1890s, that they would have large cruisers who are basically second-class battleships as well as cruisers. That they would provide a second line to the battleship line because they would never have enough battleships to win a fight. That's their plan. So they're always sort of looking at their cruiser and going, volume of fire, volume of fire, volume of fire, volume of fire, because there isn't really any way you can make a decent cruiser and it doesn't stand up to a battleship's guns. But if you can plaster a battleship with enough shells, you can perhaps stop it from firing at you. Or rather, you can distract it so that your own battleships can beat it to a pulp. It's basically the same philosophy as why 6-inch cruisers are the Royal Navy's favourite over 8-inch cruisers in the run-up to World War II. Because the Royal Navy's looking at going, sheer volume of fire at likely engagement ranges, the 6-inch gun is outperforming the 8-inch gun in every single metric in terms of number of shells actually coming into contact with their target. And, oh yeah, we can mount a triple turret of 6-inch guns versus a twin turret of 8-inch guns, so we can have 12 or 9. And when you add in the rate of fire, etc., that really starts to add up in volume of shells. And then you consider percentage of hits, and the fact that things like, yes, the engines and the guns, etc., might be armoured on a ship, but the fire control won't be. It can't be. It's too high up in the ship. And suddenly, those things start to make sense. And they even make sense when you're talking about 8-inch versus heavy versus a battleship. When you're talking cruiser versus a battleship. US Navy wasn't into that. No, the US Navy was looking at cruiser arm for one thing and one thing only. They didn't have a massive maritime empire they had to patrol. They didn't have, well, really the same level of global trade commitments that the British had to maintain. They could actually afford to extend to ride off the British coattails on that front. Hey, look, the British factored into their whole treaty negotiations the fact they doubted Congress would ever actually fund the US Navy to the level they were asking for. And the US Navy factored into their treaty negotiations the fact that the Royal Navy would still be having to patrol those same trade lanes, so they didn't need to. Both sides are factoring in things which are going to restrict the other. That happens in the treaty negotiations. So what's the US Navy focusing on? Reconnaissance. Information. There is an often quoted idea that the US Armed Forces developed a lesson from the Civil War that it was better to expend things rather than people. The trouble is you have to know where to expend the things. Information became a constant target for the United States. Gathering that information, finding the enemy force. Originally, that's what the cruisers were about. The cruisers were their scout force. They literally had their fleet divided into the battle fleet and the scout fleet. The scout fleet was supposed to be headed by Lexingtons. And even when they're turned from battle cruisers into carriers, they are to an extent considered the leaders of it. But the trouble is, this can be the tip of your spear. That's what it's basically designed as. Designed to go in fast, have enough firepower to get itself out of trouble, and withdraw. When it's a aircraft carrier, you do not want it being the tip of your spear. You don't. I know they stick 8-inch guns on them, but, and I will clarify this because I've had to clarify this in so many videos, because I said I don't agree with it. I think it was a silly idea to do so because of the weight it puts up on the top of the ship. It's because under the Washington Treaty you can build as many cruisers you like, they just have to be less than 10,000 tons. So they could have just built some more built another cruiser or another pair of cruisers for each carrier, given them the 8-inch guns, and not had them on the carrier. It's under the London Treaty that they start to get total tonnage limitations, and suddenly the idea of putting guns on your carrier of 8-inch starts to sort of make sense for a short period after the first London Treaty. And then you have the second London Treaty, and you have the realization that World War II is coming, and it no longer makes sense. Because you build the escorts. You don't rely on a carrier trying to defend itself. At no point do you want it thinking it's going to defend itself. You want it running away. Fast. But they still build the cruisers, which were going to be part of that original scouting force, in its original formation. The Pensacola's, etc. make sense if you put them in a formation with a Lexington-class battlecruiser. They're a scout force. They're an 8-inch gunned equivalent version of a Town-class cruiser from 1910. They are there to provide information. They're there to find information. And everything is focused on getting ships which are as the best length to beam ratio possible. And have as narrow a profile as possible. Hence they have this arrangement of twin, triple. Okay, yes, it gives them an extra gun vis-a-vis counties, etc. But in the nicest way, anyone who ends up fighting a county in a Pensacola is not going to be having a good day. Because A, they've lost some speed, and B, well, in the nicest way, they've just about found something that actually does have some equivalent of armour. Pensacola class is really Okay, there is all or nothing armor, and there is some armor around the ship, and certain spaces, magazines, etc., are moderately protected. But that is not a ship designed to fight another 8-inch cruiser. It really isn't. But that never was its role. Its role was to find the enemy, then act as a fast wing supporting the battle fleet while they're doing their job. It's not supposed to fight ships. It's supposed to run away from anything which can fight it. And dominate everything that can't. They are cruiser equivalents of battle cruisers. Or rather, the battle cruiser is the ultimate expression of this scout cruiser phenomenon. The idea that you can run away from everything you can't fight and overwhelm everything you can't run away from. That's what they're built to. And it makes sense as part of a reconnaissance battle. It makes sense in the Pacific. If you consider the vast, untrammeled oceans of space, and please note I did say oceans of space, because let's be honest, we do tend to divide the Pacific up into north, south, east, or west, depending on what we're talking about. And it is a massive ocean itself, but it's practically multiple oceans in it. If you consider all that space, and you consider you don't have satellite reconnaissance, aircraft reconnaissance, even seaplane systems are in their infancy at this point. Ship-based reconnaissance is going to be the order of the day. Even if those ships have aircraft aboard them, they are going to need to be far-flung and far forward. And the other problem for the US Navy is they know their ships are slower. Their battle line is slower than the Japanese. They know that. They decided Japan is the likely opponent. To be honest, Japan decided America was a likely opponent, so they both seem to be quite happy with that decision. It's always so nice when you decide who your likely opponent is, that turns out to be. The British decided Japan was to be a likely opponent, then ended up fighting Germany, Italy, and then Japan. And basically Britain's strategic estimates went, Japan's likely to be an opponent, then Italy went fascist and started getting really annoying. Okay, now Italy's a threat. Oh, and Germany has gone fascist and become really annoying. Oh, great. And they also had communist Russia in there as well, but they were less worried about them until they actually managed to build anything in naval. And mainly their policy for Russia resolved around making sure the Finns had an adequate supply of bullets. It worked. But leaving that to one side, for America and Japan, they decided who the likely threat was and who they were likely going to fight, and it was each other. And the Americans are looking at the Pacific and are looking at the distances they have to travel and cover in the 1920s, and they're going, okay. Well, the maximum we're allowed to build under the Washington Treaty is a vessel of 10,000 tons armed with 8-inch guns. We want to get the prima reconnaissance asset for that capability out of there. And they do. However, there is a new treaty. In 1930, there is a new treaty. The first London Naval Treaty. And it is... okay, it's a dog's breakfast of a treaty, to be honest. Let's be honest. It is absolutely atrocious. I'm not sure if anyone remotely sensible was involved in its creation in terms of naval powers. It seems to be a full politician rant. And then if you look at the second London Naval Treaty, it just gets worse, because they actually removed the naval personnel from that one, because, you know, the naval personnel last time have tried to interject some measures of sense into it and couldn't agree on vital things because it wasn't really sensible things to agree upon. So the politicians got rid of them so they could agree it, because that will stop a war. Yeah. Because, you know, it's a very easy thing to do is to try and blame World War One simply on a naval arms race. It's so nice when you can blame everything on one problem. One thing caused all this. One thing caused all these problems. That must be such a nice life to live in. But no, the US Navy merely sort of responds to the changing treaties by going, hang on, oh, good lord, oh. Right, so A, the naval treaties are carrying on, and B, small problem. Turns out the Japanese doctrine, looking at their ships which they're building, might be different from ours. It looks like their 8-inch ships will actually start to be sitting with the battle line and actually doing some fighting. Okay. The solution? Drop a single gun. 3 triple turrets. It is now. And use that weight to add a modicum of armour. And come with the Portland class. These ships all have beautiful lines. They are fast, graceful ships. You have to say that. The fact that they are to a single ship, not designed for the actual fighting they end up taking place in, but designed for a battle which, if it had taken... Let's also say, if the Great Pacific War between America and Japan had taken place in the 1920s, our view of the Portland, Northampton, Pensacola classes would be completely different than it is today. Because they'd have been prima reconnaissance assets, they'd have been darting ahead, and all the things which basically caused them trouble would not have had taken place. However, the world is not so nice. The world is not so nice. And US cruiser force starts to adapt. The trouble is, there's a mentality problem starting to be baked in. Mentality problem is this. US forces are going to be aggressive, fast-acting, hard-hitting forces which will dominate their opponents. That is baked into their mindset. This is what we're going to do. At no point does anyone really stop and think, what happens if the opponent also wants to be fast-acting, hard-hitting forces? There is a presumption of an American offensive versus a Japanese defensive in American doctrinal training. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's unspoken, but it's always there. Now, it turns out to be, broadly speaking, right, because, let's be honest, the Japanese are stuck on the defensive for most of World War II. They do a little bit of an offensive after Pearl Harbor, capture all sorts of things, go, yay, we won! And then go, we negotiate now. And everyone else is going, no, we carry on fighting. The Japanese go, but we negotiate now. No, we carry on fighting. But this isn't what happened with the Russians. We beat the Russians. And then we negotiated. And the British Americans are going, we no speak Japanese. We don't understand what you're saying. We fight now. It's again a cultural misunderstanding and a problem, but also it's the fact that both sides had a fundamental misunderstanding of each other. And it sort of also, to an extent, both sides thought they were going to be the powerful nation. So many nations competing over who's going to succeed Britain as the great power in the world. That's arguably one of the factors which actually causes World War I and World War II, is people, different nations, wanting to be the next great power after Britain. which is a scary thing to think about, but when you realize that being world power number one allows you to set the agenda in ways no one else can, you realize the advantage it gives your nation. And suddenly, especially to the politicians who are going to wield it, rather than the people who they are going to send off to earn it, it becomes very much worth it. Very much so. Now, the New Orleans class are a really good example of this changing US Navy, of them starting to think about how they're going to fight, who they're going to fight, what they're going to fight, with what, where they're going to fight. And that they're 8-inch cruisers, they're heavy cruisers, because up to that point, the US Navy actually hadn't been calling them heavy cruisers. Please note, they hadn't been. There are several times in US Navy history, and there are several times in modern history, from throughout the 20th century, that people suddenly change designations of ships with the stroke of a pen. They go from light cruisers to heavy cruisers. They go from scout cruisers to heavy cruisers, because they have an 8-inch gun. But that actually doesn't change the ship. It just changes its designation. And then it's put in this category of heavy cruiser. And when we compare it to other heavy cruisers, it goes, ouch. I can't win in this category. Well, it could never win in that category. It wasn't designed for that category. It was never conceived as being part of that category. It's now in that category. New Orleans class are designed to be in the 8-inch category. They're not all the way there, but they're getting there. And again, 9 8-inch guns and a mixture of weaponry. But it's a good ship. It's a good class. And it gives them some capabilities. It gives them some real advantages when it comes to fighting. The New Orleans class are capable vessels, but also they are about changing the mindset of your cruiser force. Because your cruisers have been about reconnaissance, about scouting, about, to an extent, guerre de course. And now you're changing them to being about fighting, about supporting operations, about task group operations. They're supposed to be the tips of the spears. Now you're making them into the head. And there's a difference. There's a difference. Then the Brooklyn class come about, and I love them in the town class. Honestly, I love them because it's just basically pure, unadulterated military pragmatism at work. The idea is 6-inch guns are going to give you such a volume of fire at a target that, frankly, considering the level of armouring you can actually do on 10,000 tons, it don't matter. It doesn't matter. Unless they have literally built something which has 6 8-inch guns in forward in 2 triple turrets and use the rest of the weight, the absolute entirety of the rest of the weight, for engines and armour. There is not a chance in hootenanny that they will actually build something that is going to withstand multiple hits by 6-inch shells. Multiple hits. And please note that. That's the point. If you get hit once by a shell, okay, maybe your armor can stand up to it. That's great. But if I'm firing 15 shells, or 12 shells, 6 to 10 times a minute, let's go for 6. I have got 90 shells in the air in only 1 minute. Let's say I have a 10% chance, 5% chance of hitting you. That means, on average, I will get 9 hits in minutes. Those will add up. Because let's say I have 8-inch guns, and let's say I have 10 of those, and I can fire 4 rounds a minute. So I'm getting 40 in the air. I'll get 80 over 2 minutes, and let's say I still have a 5% chance of hitting you. That's 4 rounds of hitting. Yes, individually those 4 rounds can be more dangerous, but let's be honest, if those 4 rounds, let's say one's a deflection, one's hit somewhere vital, versus 9, the odds of me hitting somewhere vital with a 9 is far greater than me hitting something vital with a 4. And that adds up, because the more hits you receive, the probably less likely you can keep up your rate of fire back. So it becomes a cumulative effect. And this is where the light cruisers start to come in. But there is a problem for the US Navy. Light cruisers are great on paper. They can provide the volume of fire, they can provide the capabilities. Honolulu here will provide one of the most beautiful and most capable vessels of World War II. And yet, they don't trust 6-inch fire to deal with Japanese battleships, and Congos specifically. Yes, Congo started life as battle cruisers. And yes, there is a debate as to whether or not they finished life still as battle cruisers. I can see some colleagues say they do. My own view is that they're so much rebuilt internally that whilst they still have the same armour structure, etc., they have so much more subdivision internally, they edge towards fast battleship territory. But still, the US Navy, and to extent the Royal Navy, were both considering their 8-inch gun vessels were supposed to be able to, well, should be able to, at least fend them off. No, this is pre-World War II. This is pre the Royal Navy seeing Triber-class destroyers going toe-to-toe with Italian battleships and going, "You're not getting past me. Nope. I will fire baked bean cans at you. You are not getting past." That's still in the future. At this time, they are still thinking about stopping power. And for them, the next thing down from a capital ship, from any capital ship, if you can't have one available, has got to be your 8-inch cruiser under the treaty system. And so you've got to look at your cruisers as, is this our chance to stop someone? And this is where Wichita comes from. Wichita is the last of the treaty cruisers for the US Navy. Basically, consider it a Brooklyn and a New Orleans got together one night and had relations. And the vessel that came out had the Brooklyn hull, the Brooklyn machinery, the Brooklyn, to an extent, armor style, and the New Orleans weaponry. She's gorgeous. She's capable. And frankly, she is the template for all that comes afterwards. This is the point at which the US Navy starts to develop their cruiser force into the fighting force it will be in World War II. Especially once the other classes that come after her come into service. Wichita is arguably the other option for the finest heavy cruiser, 8-inch cruiser, produced under the treaty system. There are 2 main options, but there is cases to be made for county class, not for the cut price counties, Anyone tries to make a case for the cut price counties, and no. But Wichita, she's a key vessel. She's key to development, she's key to the thinking, she's key to every single part of the development force of the US Navy. And she's a key fighting vessel. She goes to almost every theatre of war in World War II. There are very few US ships who get to do that. She's a class of 1. But she's a class of 1 because World War II starts coming down the slips very quickly. And, yeah, they're getting worried. And they start changing things. Then you get the Atlantas. Now, are the Atlantas treaty cruisers? Well, they are certainly a response to the treaties. And a second London Naval Treaty specifically produces both the Atlantas and the Didos, I would argue. It also, to an extent, contributes towards the tribals. This is an expression of someone realizing that air defense needs to be maximized. Then you need to have the capabilities to really put up a lot of air defense. Now, why is this? Well, to an extent, it's the US Navy reacting to their own exercises and the Royal Navy's exercises and the information that they have going between the two. And both forces are working on a similar air defense plan, in that you have the volume of, well, your fighters will hopefully break up enemy air groups coming in. Then those large groups, so break up wings into squadrons. Those squadrons will be broken up into flights by heavy AA fire, i.e. 5-inch and that sort of thing. Those flights will then be broken up into 1s and 2s by things like probably your 1-inch guns. And then hopefully your 20mm or machine guns or etc. will probably kill the plane if it actually gets close. But hopefully the fact is you'll be able to dodge whatever a single plane is chucking at you. That's the idea. You have layers of air defense. A layered approach to air defense. That doesn't sound at all. Oh yes, that is still the current standard because it works. Admittedly these days, because, and I've said this in a video before and I'll say it again, missiles do not have the squishy organic bit flying them that planes do. They don't get so scared by air defense, so you actually have to concentrate on killing them. When you're dealing with squishy organic bits, the vast majority of pilots, like the vast majority of troops in infantry combat, etc., do not want to be there. They don't. There are all sorts of stats about what percentage of troops actually do the fighting in a combat zone. And it's never as high as people presume. Because it takes a lot of effort to push yourself to do that sort of thing. It takes a lot of effort to fly your aircraft at someone and drop bomb. Yes, that's almost easier than infantry combat. Probably actually is, because you can think you're just dealing with the ship, you can forget the crew. But it still takes effort. And if you've got a volume of fire coming at you, life gets progressively worse. Ah, the Cleveland class. They are good ships. They really are. They have so many different things going for them. As a design, they are probably one of the most sensible designs the US Navy puts out. They are, again, it's kind of like the Royal Navy, when they're building the wartime version of the town class, or they're working out, hang on, we need to do the emergency war build version to churn out these much as possible. They drop the number of turrets down to 3 and churn out the crown colonies. US Navy goes, yeah, we need to build some light cruisers, some 6-inch cruisers. But they're going to need to have really good air defense as well, because we need a lot of 5-inch fire, because we're going to be in the middle of... We've got no cover, no support anywhere. We're in the middle of the ocean. When a battle happens, we're going to be facing wave upon wave of carrier aircraft. And they could be coming from any point on the compass, so we need all the ships to have firepower. So they literally drop some of the 6-inch guns of the of the Brooklyn class, and build something with more 5-inch 38s. What they had just been sort of festooning the Atlanta class with. It works. It provides them with the capabilities they need. It's a general purpose cruiser. It's got the 6-inch guns which can deal with destroyers, they can deal with surface threats, and with the sheer volume of fire they put up, they can deal with other cruisers. It's got the 5-inch 38s to give it air defense, and it's got pretty much everything it needs to do the job, and a top speed of 32.5 knots, so it's not bad at all. But the US Navy wanted to do that sort of thing with, and you can also, if you go back, look at the Wichita and go, there's a policy of encircling a ship with AA fire that's starting to come in, and oh, there it is, and oh, there it is again, which is why you can argue Wichita is the genesis point. The Brooklyns provide the hulls. Wichita, the sort of basic layout. And this is the Baltimore class, which, of course, they're heavy cruisers. And the US Navy builds 14 of these. 14. Some aren't decommissioned till 1980 in Italy. That is, Chicago. Which, of course, are featured in the missile conversions video the other day. First launched 1942. Baltimore is commissioned 1943. These ships represent the culmination of the US Navy transitioning from a reconnaissance cruiser force to a fighting cruiser force. They can still do reconnaissance, but you cannot say this ship is built around the reconnaissance mission. It isn't. It's built around the mission of anywhere I go, unless you bring very heavy units, I can dominate. And I will be the boss. Now, no matter how well you build ships, you cannot make up for people being fundamentally silly when it comes to intelligence. And that is a problem that's often leveled at US Navy cruisers, that, they prove to be weak against torpedoes. Well, A, US naval intelligence doesn't seem to believe the Long Lance exists. And B, there is the fact that US naval officers, some of them, if we consider Tassafarenga and other actual battles which take place in World War II, There is a period at the beginning of the war where US Navy officers, and even sometimes actually not that quite long into the war, seem actually surprised. A, the Japanese are turning up and attacking them, because the Japanese are supposed to be on the defensive. They're supposed to be waiting for the Americans to come to them. And B, they are not actually doing what doctrine says. They're steaming in a straight line. They're not zigzagging. And yes, it's quicker. Yes, it's easier. But you zigzag. You zigzag. US cruisers are a good place to sort of finish the year of the cruiser. I don't think this is the last cruiser video of the year. I think that, to my mind, goes to the 100 Years of Gun Cruisers video, which will come out on the 3rd of January. Which is kind of strange because it's actually literally in 2023 when this comes out, and when it comes out. But US cruisers show the greatest transition. The Royal Navy is building their cruisers to be general purpose from the beginning of the 1920s to the end of the 1930s. The whole way through. They have no choice. Okay? Royal Navy doesn't have a choice on what they're building their cruisers for. They can't afford to have cruisers which are reconnaissance assets, cruisers which are going to be fighting assets, cruisers which are going to be... because they have them spread everywhere around the world. The Royal Navy doesn't have that strategic option. When someone comes to me and goes, well, they're building this for this, and I sit there and go, yes, but look at the actual design. It's not 100% orientated around this. At best, it's a 70% orientation on this. It's usually more a case of, this is not what we are, it's our speciality. The US Navy build ships which are things. They don't have specialities. They are a reconnaissance. They're not orientated towards. They are. And the US Navy evolves that. They evolve that, and they change as situations, and as the strategic situation and the world changes, they change. Which is great. It shows they're a learning, studying, focusing and thinking naval force. They're what you want to be. But that also means you have the problem in that the British general purpose vessels of the 1920s were still viably general purpose in the 1930s. The US Navy's reconnaissance cruisers of the 1920s found themselves in the 1940s fighting a war they hadn't been designed for. And to do that, you then need to get very creative with your command structure. And you need to get very creative in how you adapt to operations. And the trouble is, some officers could adapt quickly, and some officers, despite the build-up, never seem to have a chance to mature to adapt into that. They didn't realise it, almost. Again, I keep going for the same operation because, well, the ship's here and it's one of those battles I've actually covered. But Honolulu is the only ship of her battle line, of her cruiser line, which really escapes unscathed. And does it by breaking orders. By breaking line and zigzagging away so they're not in the line of the torpedoes. Or mines, or whatever was there. You don't know. But it takes a lot of courage. Moral courage. For a captain to basically ignore their admiral's orders and do what they think they need to do. Yes, a captain's first priority should be saving their ship. Should always be fighting their ship. But if you go against an admiral's orders and you're wrong, court-martial and losing your ship is the likely result. If you're right, then maybe you do okay, but you can still face a court-martial and still have to defend your actions. Because people don't, because armed forces, they are not built on people disobeying orders. Why? Because if you don't tell everyone, for reasons of operational security and timing often, the full nature of what plans can be going on. So if you tell someone, I need you there doing this at this time, you don't want them to go, I don't feel like doing that, I think I'll go here. And then, because they're not there, that means this thing over there and this thing over there can't happen, which means the whole attack falls apart. It's not the way things can work. You can hope it could work like that way, but it's not going to work that way. So, if you do disobey orders, if you do break your orders, and do something like the captain of Honolulu did, like other captains did, which saved their ships, it's a big thing. It's a very big thing. But again, the US Navy was lucky because it had captains who would. And the Royal Navy was lucky because it had captains who would. And this is probably another example of where there is a sort of innate advantage in the mass of the Royal Navy and the US Navy at this point versus the, I would say, especially the German Navy in terms of surface ship command. Italian Navy has some very good captains. But the trouble is for the German Navy is that, to be honest, the independent thinkers have sort of get weeded out. It's not good. And Japan has a whole layer of issues beyond that. We won't get into that today. Today is about US Navy cruisers. But no. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you found it useful and interesting, and I hope you enjoyed the series. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your support, and take care. Got the Battle of Coronel on the 6th of January, so that's going to be live this week when this comes out. And I will see you hopefully on the 1st of January for Brew Ships 98, which will be on something. Probably just me chatting away, because I may or may not have books with me. I'm not sure where I'm going to be when I'm doing it. Thank you for watching. Take care, and hope you have a good New Year.